So, in the Buddhist texts, it's said that our minds create our world, that our intentions and our actions literally impact the world around us. So, how might our intentions affect the world? Well, you might have heard of the double-slit experiment. Essentially, what they found was that a single phenomenon, like an atom or light, can behave in one of two ways, like a particle or like a wave. If you haven't heard of it before, don't worry. Very simply, what happened. So pretend my bottle is like a machine firing tennis balls, okay? It's full of tennis balls firing at the wall, and all the tennis balls are covered in paint. So it fires out tennis balls, they hit the wall, and they leave a mark of paint, right? But now you put a screen and it's not completely obstructing. There are two slits, one right, one left, and you keep firing out the tennis balls. And some of them will get through the right slit, and some will get through the left slit, and they'll hit the back wall covered in paint and leave a mark. That's sort of what they did, but at a subatomic level. And what did they find? They found that when you put a detector, when you try and follow and check where is your tennis ball going, or the atom, the electron, the photon, when you try and check, okay, is it going through the left or the right? Where is it going? The minute you do that, it behaves like a particle, like a tennis ball smacking the wall. But when you don't measure, when you're not there checking on it, when you turn away and go do the cooking, the mark that you get on the screen at the back is as if all of these tennis balls that you're firing out of the machine, it's as if they behave like a wave or like two waves on an ocean coinciding. And that's the mark they leave on the screen. So they found this with atoms and electrons and small packets of light. And this gave rise to what was known as wave-particle duality, that this one phenomenon can behave either like a particle or like a wave. But even more curious than that was this phenomenon that when you check on what it's doing and try to measure it, it behaves like a particle. When you don't, it behaves like a wave. Now, this was discovered decades ago. They repeated the experiment many times, got the same results consistently and pervasively. And what this gave rise to was the beginning of discussion about the observer effect, meaning that perhaps the observer is involved in creating this strange outcome. And what began to happen with time is a lot of scientists were not happy with this as an explanation. They agree with the findings of the experiment, but they're not comfortable with the idea of the observer effect. And so it started to become unpopular. So one scientist called Dean Radin, and I will put a link below to his experiment. It has subtitles. If you click on the settings icon, you can find the translations. It's a little tricky because he's a geeky physicist. No, I mean, he's so much respect for him, but he's a scientist. So it is a little difficult to follow in places, but it is absolutely fascinating. So 100% highly recommended to take a look at it. It's really groundbreaking stuff, lots to think about. So I'll put that down below. So what did Dean Radin do? He said, if it is true that there is an observer effect, then conscious observers, human beings, should be able to impact the experiment, whether or not you've got the typical detector apparatus there. What did he do? He set up the double slit experiment. He brought in teams of volunteers and got them to, with their mind, try to imagine the particle outcome. So he was running the experiment, and then he had groups of volunteers try to influence the experiment. Because if there is an observer effect, there should be an effect of the observer, right? Makes sense? So he had two groups of volunteers. First group, no particular power of concentration. Most of us, mind distracted. They were instructed to pay attention and try to imagine the journey of the particle through the screen. And frankly speaking, in the results, it had zero impact, no measurable impact over and above what you would expect by chance, just nothing. But then he had a second group of participants who had strong powers of concentration. Then what happened? There was a difference. They were better at imagining the journey of a particle. First of all, visualize. He said this. First of all, to visualize a particle traveling through a slit to hit a screen is not so easy, but that's what they did. And his findings were that although the first group with no notable concentration abilities had no impact, the group with strong powers of concentration, he called them meditators, but there were also people who, perhaps because of their job, their profession, were good at concentrating. And they had a statistically significant impact on the results of the experiment, significantly over and above what you would expect by chance. And to give you some quantification of the level of the impact they had, the technical term is Six Sigma variance, but the level of variance over and above what you would expect by chance was at the level that people have won Nobel Prizes for. So it's small in the grand scheme of life, but for that level of experiment, the significance was comparable to the significance in experiments that have won Nobel Prizes. So, significant impact in the meditator group, the concentration group. So he published his findings in a journal called Physics Essays, right? Not Freaks Weekly, Physics Essays. What happened? Well, of course, people came in with doubts and questions. They said, I don't know, the equipment for these experiments, it's very sensitive. Perhaps the change is because you had human people and they were interfering with the equipment. We can't take these findings at face value. Okay. Logically speaking, however, if that were the reason, then you would have had the same impact with the non-meditator group. But okay, good point. He said, good point, accept. So he took the volunteers out of the building. He took them thousands of miles away. He did the experiment again remotely, with volunteers sometimes from countries thousands of miles away. What did he find? Have a guess. The results were the same. The distance didn't make any difference. What made the difference was the power of concentration of the volunteers involved in the experiment. Now again, he's very measured. He says this is a small impact, small. but measurable. And in the interest of scientific inquiry, he is encouraging other people to replicate this experiment. So if you are a scientist and you are interested, you can contact him. He would be very happy. And as far as I know, some people are starting to replicate it and finding it very interesting. I don't know if the research has been published yet. Okay. All right. So that was his findings. Very interesting. We might say, well, if that's the case, if it is true that concentrated attention of observers can have an impact on physical systems, albeit at a very small level, wouldn't we see some evidence of that in the world? I'm glad you asked. Now we get a little bit into the realm of science fiction, but walk with me. In 1993, there was a study done by a group of meditators. I think it was the Ramana Maharishi group of transcendental meditators. They had predicted, or he had predicted, bit of a genius, he had predicted that a group of people performing meditation, a sufficiently large group, still small, 1% of the population would do. 1% of a population doing this meditation, they predicted, could have a reduction in crime. And the police said, you must be joking. But they bought into it. The study was set up in a very organized way. It was published later in journals. I think the journal is Indicators of Social Research. You'll find it. It's well publicized, well documented now, the study. So the group got together, they did their practice of transcendental meditation, and indeed, in the 2-month period that they did this practice, there was measurable reduction in serious violent crime, specifically homicides, rapes, and assaults. Interestingly, robberies, no change. I'm sorry, I said it had an impact. That's my bad. I should have said in the period there was measured difference. We can't, yeah. Okay, you understand my point. All right. I shouldn't jump to conclusions. Okay. So in the period, they noticed a measurable decrease in crime of around 20% and at a maximum of 23. Now, just to put this in context, the chief of police said the only thing that would cause that level of variance in June or July would be a snowstorm. So that's what they did. I remember the first time hearing about it and thinking, oh yeah, right, it sounds like a fairy tale. But this has been replicated again and again and again, multiple times over 30 years. There are at least 13 peer-reviewed studies done on this phenomenon. They did a similar experiment after that in 24 cities in the US against a control group. So they had 24 cities where they were getting 1% of the population to do this practice and measuring, keeping track of crime and so forth, and 24 control cities. I will put some links below. By all means, please do your own research, pick holes in it, evaluate, because the numbers are staggering. So good to be curious, but good to be critical. So what did they find? In the study of 24 cities, the reduction went down even as far as 24%. So these are quite striking numbers. There are also studies done in conflict zones, in war zones. Now, let's take a step back a minute and say, what is their explanation for this phenomenon? Their explanation is Okay, so we're just going with their hypothesis. Keep an open mind, right? Critical thinking. So open mind, don't let your brain fall out. Critical, but open, okay? So their explanation is that in any group, the consciousness of an individual participates in the consciousness of the group. It's as if there's a group and then each part contributes to the energy of the group and is impacted by it. If that sounds like spiritual mumbo jumbo, remember Dean Radin's experiment. At a distance of thousands of miles, there was a small but statistically significant correlation between the concentrated attention of the meditators and the physical system. Please check out the video for more details. So remember what Dean Radin said. His experiment points to the possibility of a non-local impact of the consciousness of an individual. So if we put that at group level, then the consciousness of each individual in the group is contributing to an atmosphere so that, and this was the theory that the meditators had, so that in a group, if a sufficient critical mass of that group bring down the emotional temperature, they are, the word they used is incoherence, in harmony. They lower the stress of the group. This was the key point. If 1% of the group do this practice, it will lower the stress of the group. And due to lower stress levels in the collective, crime will reduce. That was their hypothesis. Okay? And so they went into these experiments with that as their working hypothesis. We're going to do this practice. We expect that the impact will be to reduce stress in the collective, and thereby that will bring down crime. Okay? And again, I will put some links there so that you can check it out. And many of these studies are in published journals. Okay, so let's take their hypothesis. All right. Now, logically then, if that is the case, when you go into high conflict situations, when you're doing it, for example, they did do it in situations of war. So my mind says, well, logically then, the impact of that group should be reduced because it's being counterbalanced by anger, hatred, violence, stress, and so on and so forth. Right? Right? Logically, let's use our logic. Logically, there should be less of an effect. I will leave you to go and look up some of the numbers. I still can't believe some of them. I'm still processing the information, honestly. It doesn't make sense. So I can't reconcile it. I can't get from Dean Radin here, small and measurable, to some of the numbers. I can't. And the idea that in war, some of the indicators could be even, the reduction could be even more than in some of the US cities. I just can't. It's too much for my little head. So, how do we reconcile this? This is where I do two things. I'm going to turn a little bit to some of the Buddhist texts, and on the basis of that, I am going to speculate wildly. So walk with me a little while. Okay. Because can you see the discrepancy? Small and measurable, 20, 23, 24%. How do we get from there to here? Can you see? And we're talking about small groups, a few hundred, 1,000, 4,000 people. Come on, right? How do we explain this? We need help. I need help. I don't know about you. I need help. Okay, so Lama Tsongkhapa in the I believe it's in Lamrim Chenmo, I think so, says that Well, no. Step back. Lama Tsongkhapa was a Tibetan pandit, practitioner, teacher, and he lived in the 13 and 1400s. And he had an incredible impact in his life. Someone went to him and said, "What is the source of your power?" They probably wanted some. And he said, "The source of my power is bodhicitta, meaning the strength of my altruistic mind." Bodhicitta is a mind that, certainly in his case, is literally, spontaneously, naturally, all the time fixated on the welfare of all sentient beings without exception. So he was saying, I want to become enlightened so that I can benefit every single sentient being without exception. And if that sounds wild, just remember we're all connected. So that was his mind. He had this powerfully altruistic mind. And he said, that is the source of the power of my actions. This powerfully vast, altruistic mind wanting to benefit all sentient beings, that is the source of my power. And then I have here, okay, this is Supplement to the Middle Way by Chandrakirti. Okay, so another text. And it's said, so now it's said in the text that the first time somebody generates this incredible altruistic mind that Lama Tsongkhapa is speaking of, that the earth shakes because it's so powerful. But then they go on to grow and develop and increase their altruism, increase their love, increase their compassion, and increase their wisdom until they reach the point where they have a direct realization of reality. What happens? So in Supplement to the Middle Way, Chandrakirti says, once that person has become so developed in both their wisdom and their altruistic heart, when they reach the first ground, the text says, this text was written, I don't know when, 1,000 years ago, thereabouts. Probably more. I don't know. Someone else will know. I don't know. Long time ago. So text says, when the bodhisattva, the practitioner, reaches that level, the bodhisattva retains a supreme joy and is able to vibrate 100 world systems. So, if I start at Dean Radin, subatomic, small, measurable, I can't get to these findings. They sound lovely, but I can't get there. But if we consider what Lama Tsongkhapa said, the incredible power of the altruistic motivation, and we extrapolate backwards, then things have a possibility of making sense. What if it wasn't just the meditation? What if it was the motivation of the experiment? Remember, they went into the experiment, these meditators, wanting to bring peace to a large population. And somewhere, I think I've lost the webpage now, but somewhere on the website, it says that once they could see the effect, they started doing more and more. And after 1978, they deliberately went out into conflict zones with the wish for world peace. What if these results aren't so much due to the meditation, the focus? What if these huge results are due to the power of the incredible altruistic motivation that the volunteers had when they went into the experiment? Because they all understood the assignment. They knew what they were there for, right? That's why they were doing it. So it isn't just a case of going sitting on a cushion and doing a practice, however wonderful. Is it possible that because they all went into this experiment and they were doing it together, which is also said to amplify the effect, it's one of the reasons I think why it's suggested that monastics live together, the power. It's why it's suggested we do retreat together, practice together. Power is amplified in group. So that's one component, but still these numbers. So what if it's not just the meditation? It's not even just the power of the group. What if the motivation with which they did these experiments made the difference? And that would explain also, because I have some basis for this theory, it would explain how the effect wasn't completely neutralized in war. Because imagine you're doing it strong. I imagine they're doing it strongly motivated by the wish for peace. Perhaps even motivated by the wish for peace in the world. And Pabonka Rinpoche in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand says, if you offer, let's see if I have one. If you offer a stick of incense motivated by a vast altruistic wish, I mean, it has to be heartfelt, right? Not just blah, blah, heartfelt wish, genuine heartfelt wish to be of benefit to all sentient beings. If you offer a stick of incense with that mind, he says, the positive potential of that action is commensurate to the number of sentient beings you are holding in your motivation. That's what he says. I'm just sharing information and speculating a little bit to try and understand these numbers, right? So with that in mind, perhaps that's what made the difference. Because I bet if you got a group of seamstresses or watch repairers with really good powers of concentration and got them to go and do this meditation experiment, I don't think you would get the same results. But it's this specific group of practitioners with this vast motivation, I speculate that that's what's making the difference. I have to speculate. Because, or it's a hoax, and 13 or more peer-reviewed research articles published in all of these journals are wrong. It's one possibility. Or it's something else, another possibility. But this has been replicated time after time. And there was one done in the Middle East, Israel, Lebanon, and that was replicated 7 times. So trying to make sense of it, small but measurable, drastic change, even in war situations. So I wonder if that's making the difference. The vast motivation they have, that's what's making the change. That's why even in war situations, despite how much negative energy there is, due to their powerful altruism, possibly that's what's making the difference. It's not at the vibrating world systems level. It's not shaking the earth, but a vast few hundred, 1,000, 4,000 people, 1%, they said is enough. Some people getting together with a powerful altruistic motive. That, for me, might explain these numbers, not just mere concentration alone. And that would again be consistent with the texts, because Lama Tsongkhapa and Lama Atisha said, you could do the same action. In this case, they said a prayer. You could do a prayer with 3 different levels of motivation. First, motivation for yourself is that it will have an impact. But when you do it for others, the impact will be vast. So again, this vast motivation, bringing in other sentient beings, having more power and impact. So, and how can we? So, what do we make of all of that? How can that make a difference to our lives? Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in his book, Making Life Meaningful, made a really beautiful point. And he said, you don't have to do great things, but try to do the small things with a vast motivation. Try to open your heart and do everything with this open, altruistic mind. So let's say you have to go into work. Well, okay, instead of just going into work to pay the bills, you go into the work as your contribution to society, to the world, because that's what it is. Otherwise, they wouldn't pay you. And the same thing when you exercise or when you raise your child, that's your contribution. So just open your heart and do the same things, but with this vast motivation saying, this is my contribution. This is what I offer. And if you think your contribution doesn't matter, I have another story for you. So this is from Jacqueline Novogratz. I think she wrote a book called The Blue Sweater, but there's also videos on YouTube of her telling this story. So she was at university. No, I'm sorry. She was at school. She was at high school. And she had a sweater. And her fellow students made fun of it. So she put it in the Goodwill, in the collection box of clothes to be given away. She went to university. She got a job, I think in finance. She left her job and she decided to get a job helping women in Rwanda. So 10 years later, there she is in Rwanda, in Kigali, to be precise. And what should happen? But in front of her appears a child, going past her, wearing her blue sweater. And she went up to him and she checked, and her name was still in the sweater. Her action wasn't lost. It mattered. Our actions matter. We matter. You matter. Any kindness you can do is not lost. So do it, and it will find its way. And even if you think you can't do much, just open your heart and do what you can with the awareness that you are part of a collective and you aren't alone. It only takes 1% to make a difference, and you don't know who else is out there trying to put their drop into the bucket. And the texts say, don't ignore the small things, because drop by drop, a bucket is filled. Well, you put your drop and someone else puts their drop. And according to the research, it only takes 1%. 1% of us. But in particular, the motivation. Try to do small things with a vast, open-hearted motivation. If you can, the motivation of bodhicitta. As much as possible, love, openness. That, at least on the face of it, seems to make a difference. I know we live in difficult times, but even in difficult times, a few good hearts make a difference. So please do what you can, whatever small thing you can, but do it with the greatest heart possible. And never give up, because it matters and because you matter. Thank you.